With Pokemon exploding into popularity during the 90s, it was only a matter of time until competitors tried to recreate its success. Or died trying. It's 2017 and we all know what franchises are still going strong. Digimon was the most successful competitor, spanning a variety of TV shows, manga and of course, video games. It's the only one that still remains in the radar of RPG fans, despite never quite reaching the heights that Pokemon did. There's a new game being released in Japan at the end of the year, with a Western release dated for a few months later. The Medabots franchise managed to survive to this day, although we would see only a small part of it. It spawned a surprisingly large number of games, mostly RPGs, which featured the titular Medabots. Its defining point was the mixing and matching of the different body parts that the player finds throughout the game. It scored some popularity outside Japan around the early 2000s when the anime and a couple of games were localized, most notably the remake of Medabots 2 for the Game Boy Advance. It seems like the series hasn't been doing that well lately, but with the recently announced ports of the Game Boy titles, maybe it will get back on its feet. The Robopon games weren't quite as lucky. Of the two initial versions, Robopon Sun and Star, only Sun got a Western release, and only in America. Star and a third version called Moon remained in the land of the rising sun. A Nintendo 64 game was also a thing that happened, but it stayed in Japan as well. The sequels on the Game Boy Advance were both released in America, but again not in Europe. In the end, Robopon never quite caught on, and it silently faded away into obscurity and YouTube videos. However, the series that got the shortest end of the stick was Telefang. In November of 2000, a company called Smilesoft published a pair of games developed by Natsume with the unusual premise of monsters that communicate with others using cell phones. Keitai Denjuu Telefang, or Mobile Phone Beast Telefang, came in power and speed flavors, featuring a different starter Denjuu and some exclusives for each version. The initial copies also came bundled with a little add-on called the Power Antenna. By attaching it to the Game Boy, its light would flash whenever you received the call in-game. An amusing little gimmick to be sure, but since it has no in-game purpose and the game itself alerts you with a ringtone, I imagine it's more of a collector's item than anything else nowadays. The game starts by asking you to set the time for the in-game clock, which ultimately doesn't do much. You then name the protagonist, who is canonically named Shigeki, but of course you're free to name him whatever you want. Nobody would judge you. Once you're done, you see some nerd called Matsukiyo going up to a tree and nearly getting hit by a baseball. The protagonist comes to pick up the ball, gets bullied by a girl, and then talks with the nerd, but their conversation quickly shifts into the topic of the Denjuu world. Suddenly, they hear a phone ringing from within the tree, and of course, they do what anyone else would. They answer the call. This couldn't possibly end any other way. After a rather painful looking landing, they realized that they somehow reached the Denjuu world. After a few moments of panicking, a suspicious turtle invites the two underage boys into its shack and gives them some basic background info on this strange new land. Well, new to them at least. According to the nerd, D-shots, which are special phones that have 4 bars of range and are required to reach the Denjuu world, aren't very common. However, there are, let's say, a metric ton of humans in here. In short, the Sanaiba pharmaceutical company somehow discovered the Denjuu world and introduced cell phones to the monsters so that they could easily talk with others. Regardless, you get introduced to your starter Denjuu, Crypto in the power version and Fungus in the speed version. You're then tasked with waking up Netaro so that the village's water supply goes back to normal. And thus the adventure starts. In your travels, you will make friends, fight enemies, explore the unknown, and of course, save the world. The overall theme of the game is friendship, which is what you would expect from a game of this kind. Your end goal is to become friends with every Denjuu, but in your path will stand many obstacles. From a wannabe politician who promises to open a curry shop, to a brooding jerk that serves as your rival, to an overgrown duck, and many others. Lack of screen scrolling aside, I'm fond of how the game looks. It has that top-down Gameboy graphics aesthetic that many RPGs on the system used, and maybe it's just nostalgia speaking, but I really like this kind of blocky, squished style. I also find many of the Denjuu designs appealing, which is of course very important in a game about collecting monsters. The battle screen is rather bland, but hey, it gets the job done. It's only a shame that there are no back sprites, only the regular sprite flipped left or right. The music is also great. All the tracks have that delicious, catchy 8-bit flavor to them, with special mention to the overworld and battle themes. This is good because they are the ones you will hear the most. This shouldn't be that surprising, however, because the composer, Kinuyo Yamashita, has also worked on other games with equally great soundtracks, such as Mega Man X3, Castlevania, and, curiously enough, the Medabots series. So far, so good. But what about the gameplay? Well, it's not that great. The biggest problem is that the combat system simply doesn't have much depth to it. Each Denjuu has one habitat type assigned to it out of a total of 6 types, and each has a weakness and a resistance. However, all of a Denjuu's moves use the type of the Denjuu itself instead of each having its individual type, so there's little variety when it comes to battle strategy. To make things worse, every Denjuu only learns up to 4 moves in total, usually 2 offensive moves, 1 support move and 1 Denma attack. Regular offensive moves all run off the attack stat, whereas the Denma attack uses the, Denma attack stat and requires charging up for a few turns. A lot of moves also share the same power value, so they are effectively clones of each other. As an example, Kryptonite learns both Assault and Iron Claw, but both moves have the same power, so the only difference between them is the animation. Another questionable mechanic is calling friends to help you in battle. You only have one Denjuu with you at all times, but you can call 1 or 2 Denjuu to help, depending on how strong the phone signal is in the area. However, you need to wait a certain number of turns before they arrive. The amount of turns it takes depends on the distance between your current position and the place where you befriended the Denjuu. It can take from 1 turn, which means they arrive instantly, to upwards of 6 and 7 turns, making them rather unreliable. There's also a random chance that the Denjuu gets distracted and takes even longer to arrive. To be fair, this also applies to opponents, but I feel that this system incentivizes the player to use one reliable main Denjuu for the entire game, and use whatever others they find in the current area as support. It's also hard to keep your older Denjuu at adequate levels unless you go out of your way to raise them. Another less important complaint is that maybe some of the late game dungeons could be a bit shorter, but most of them are fine as they are. There are a few that have overly simple designs, such as the Craft Research Labs and the Overgrown Ducks dungeon, which are mostly square rooms connected to each other, either through simple passages or teleporters. Cactus Ruins is not one of those. It's a gigantic 8-floor dungeon filled with nothing but corridors and copy-pasted rooms, with stairs constantly leading up and down. I've played through the games multiple times over the years, but I still find it easy to get lost. The cherry on top of it all is that once you reach the end of the ruins, you have an unwinnable battle and have to go all the way back through a different route, so you can trigger another event. The rematch is also a piece of cake, making me wonder if it was really worth it. It's not awful enough to ruin the game, but it's still complete bananas, and its only saving grace is that you get a special Denjuu from the event I mentioned. Even the game's final dungeon is a cakewalk compared to this. But that's enough negativity. There is one mechanic that was done very right, and that's evolution, of which there are 3 types. The first is natural evolution, which happens when the Denjuu reaches a certain level. Crypto's line, for example, evolves at level 20, 40 and 60. Then there's fusion and web evolutions. They both work the same way, you fuse a Denjuu with an item and they will evolve. Fusion evolutions are typically weaker than natural and web evolutions and require common items that you can find on shops and treasure chests. Denjuu also have items that, when fused with, won't evolve them, but will give them experience. And this is very easy to exploit. Remember when I said that it's hard keeping your secondary Denjuu up to par by just battling other Denjuu? Well, this is one of the things you can do to compensate for that. Call them, feed them a couple of chainsaws and bazookas, and they are ready to battle whatever comes their way. Web evolutions are basically genetic experimentations and require one of 3 somewhat rare items that can be either found on treasure chests or acquired by using a phone card on specific Denjuu. And that's it really. I'm not sure if there was really any need for the game to separate between fusion and web evolutions, but there you go. Denjuu that you befriended also randomly call you for chit chat. Sometimes they just comment on what's going on with the story, while sometimes they ask you a question, which depending on your answer can either raise or lower their friendship points. Denjuu also all have their own lines in battle, whether it's for arriving or attacking. Small details, but they help make the world feel alive and give the creatures a bit more personality. So overall, what do I think of Telefang? Well, despite perhaps being a bit too harsh on it, the gameplay is serviceable. But what it really excels in is giving the player that feeling of adventure in a mysterious unknown land. For me, it managed to capture the same magic that Pokemon had, the journey and how you discover more and more creatures as you progress through the game. If this appeals to you, then by all means, do give Telefang a try. The game never got an official English release, but the fine gentlemen at Wikifang are working on a fan translation. It's not complete yet, but a lot of it is playable. The story is translated up to the Paparuna Lake, which is about 60% of the game. If you'd rather play a complete translation, well, I guess there is another option, but it's far from perfect. Very far. And that's the first pair of Telefang games. But no, we're not done yet. Say hello to Pokemon Diamond and Jade. Not that one. You see, a group of Chinese hackers decided that it would be a good plan to get some mad dosh by taking Telefang, translating it and repackaging it as a Pokemon game. The result is nothing short of atrocious. It's buggy, it's lacking features, the translation is pure English, and it's all around a complete train wreck. But train wrecks are fun to watch. Right from the start, you'll notice that you can't name the protagonist. His name is locked to Beck, and for that matter, you can't name your Denjuu either. There's also some minor graphical issues, such as the colors in the intro. To top off the crab cake that is Diamond and Jade, the game has problems loading saved data. So if you're one of the poor souls who is playing the game on an actual Game Boy, well, tough luck. The best/worst part of these bootlegs, however, has to be the English translation. It's filled with the usual suspects of poor grammar, unintentionally funny dialogues, complete nonsense, and I don't know even what else stuff whatever. Depending on your mindset, this will either make you laugh or just bring down the whole game. Or should I say, some points of quality lost. Still, I have to thank these bootlegs for one thing. If it wasn't for them, I might have never played Telefang. Even a long time ago when I stumbled upon them, I thought they were too weird to be normal Pokemon games, but I didn't care. I had lots of fun back then, and while now I simply play the originals, it's an interesting footnote in my personal gaming history. In the end, it's a shame that the series' reputation was tarnished by those meddling bootlegs, but things are changing thanks to the fan translation. As for the fate of the series, well, in 2002, a pair of sequels that greatly improved the battle mechanics was released, but that we have to wait for another day.